Dr. Hackenbush. A little later. Get me the Turkish bath.
Yes.
It's the Marx Brothers Council Podcast, episode 84, Traveling Solo. Greetings, welcome back, and welcome aboard, Marx Brothers fans, Marxists, Marxians, Marxologists. Here we are again. They call me Noah Diamond. That's one of the nicer things they call me. And I am here, as always, with the man they call Matthew Conium. Matthew Conium.
Hey there, Noah. How are you doing?
Pleasure to be here with you, as always, Matthew. And I thought it was time that we caught up with friend of the show, Brad Sohlo. Many of our listeners will remember Brad as a fan and scholar of Alexander Woollcott, the writer and critic who presided over the Algonquin Round Table and who had the honor of being Harpo Marx's best friend. We all associate Brad pretty closely with Woollcott, as he is, among other things, the administrator of an excellent Facebook group called Alexander Woollcott, the Town Crier. Brad Sohlo last appeared on this podcast 3 years ago for a general discussion of the Marx Brothers' appeal to the literary elite, and Woollcott in particular. For completists, that was episode 49, Four Empty Dunces. But a lot has happened since then, including a few things I've been hoping Brad might report on as a kind of unofficial roving correspondent for the Marx Brothers Council podcast. And so we are awfully glad to welcome him back to the show. Here he is, the one, the only, Brad Sohlo. Hi, Brad.
Well, thank you, Noah, for all of that. And hello, Matthew. And thank you for having me on the podcast. There is only one Brad Sohlo. Everyone's happy about that. And I just want to thank the council, the Marx Fest committee, for getting me finally, after many, many decades of dreaming about going to New York, to go to New York for a specific reason, which I usually need to travel anywhere. I'm not a big vacation type person. So if there's a good reason to go somewhere, and the Marx Brothers, I can't think of a better reason to go somewhere than to take part in an historic venture like Marx Fest. And it was wonderful. 50 years in the making for this Marx Brothers fan.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit. As you mentioned, you live in Minneapolis, right? Mm-hmm. That's the land of Jay Hopkins, right? I think he's on the seal of the Minneapolis State Seal. Yeah, but you have been for a very long time a full-hearted enthusiast of the Marx Brothers and the Algonquin Round Table, and maybe particularly the places where those two things overlap. How long ago was it when you first played Sheridan Whiteside and the Man Who Came to Dinner, which originated or initiated your interest in?
Well, actually, Whiteside came in. I didn't get to play Whiteside on stage in the community theater until '97. I'd actually auditioned for the role several years earlier, but I was far too young at that point to play it. But my Marx mania began in middle school. I remember in sixth grade writing a short play with Groucho and Harpo, and that we did on the stage in my school. And then in 1974, I distinctly remember getting the scrapbook for Christmas. And after that, of course, the Groucho being in the news in the mid to late 70s with various things he was doing. And then a friend of mine, a high school friend of mine, we were both Marx Brothers fans. We listened to the Carnegie Hall album over and over again. So the Marx Brothers have been a constant pretty much throughout my youth and adult life. Woollcott came into it later. He had always been kind of on the periphery. I think probably about 20 20 some years ago. Well, I played I finally played Whiteside in 97 on stage. And so for the past 20, 25 years, Woollcott has been more of a presence in the forefront of my mind. And I've apologies to Groucho. My interest has gradually shifted over to Harpo. And so finding, rereading several times Harpo Speaks, finding Bill Marx's book, Son of Harpo Speaks, and then, of course, Speaking of Harpo, coming out recently, or fairly recently, was just, to me, sent me over the moon, because it's people who were there telling the stories and of Harpo and Woollcott. So I've everything is solidified. Then, of course, starting the Facebook group in 2018, and meeting people through the Facebook group and through the Marx Brothers group has just made me not really think about anything else in my life.
It's an interesting thing that's happened with Woollcott, I think. We're so familiar with the story of how Woollcott sort of bestowed credibility and respect upon the Marx Brothers. He sort of legitimized them when he wrote his review of I'll Say She Is. In some ways, it feels like things have swung the other way now. And now if people know about Woollcott, there's a good chance they got there through the Marx Brothers. And in a sense, Harpo in particular has kind of sustained Woollcott's flame. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, definitely. And after having read Harpo Speaks years ago, when I was mostly interested in the brothers, going back and realizing how much of the book is about Harpo's relationship with Woollcott. I mean, it's I've almost wanted to do like they did several years ago, take excerpts from Harpo Speaks to make into a separate book about Neshobe and the Algonquin and that type of thing, because they did that one book called
about New York, right? Harpo Speaks
about New York. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's definitely enough in Harpo Speaks to make at least a small book about this Harpo and Woollcott. And as I've said before, my introduction to Woollcott was in the scrapbook, but I didn't realize who he was. I don't even remember reading the caption underneath that says he was a theater critic. I think I skipped over that. I saw the picture. I thought he was a banker or some business guy, and didn't know exactly why he was in the book. And then, of course, sometime later came back to that section and realized, oh, this was for many years Harpo's best friend. And they traveled together. They, of course, spent hours and hours on the island in Vermont. They went to France. They went everywhere together, and rereading the adventures in Harpo Speaks, and even some of the parts of Speaking of Harpo that Susan wrote, telling about her interaction with Woollcott on the island and so forth. You really got a sense of the relationship and the friendship between the two, which went beyond just enjoying each other's company to the point of actually being able to get in a row with each other every now and then, because they were that closely fond of each other.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there's so much about Woollcott in Harpo Speaks. So I mean, people who aren't particularly into Woollcott would say that's the biggest problem with
Drawback.
the book. Yeah, but even people who are, it does sort of overbalance the book a bit. So in a way, it's a pity, I suppose, just because he didn't think of himself in any way, shape, or form as a writer. But you almost wish he sort of broke that off and just wrote a book about Woollcott, because lengthy as that section is, presumably there was strong pressure on him to keep it as short as possible, so as not to overbalance the whole book, which was supposedly about him. So it might have been nice, I think, if he kind of dictated 2 books, just his life story, which briefly mentions Woollcott, and then really set to writing a tribute to Woollcott, because as Noah said, it is through Harpo, I think, that I would say the majority of people who know Woollcott now, know him from, and maybe some are inspired to track down a copy of Waller and Burns or whatever. But for a lot of people, it's just that. So it would have been nice, I think, if he'd just written a book about Woollcott.
Oh, and as I was saying, those chapters could be excised and made into a small book by themselves, with obviously some introduction into why that would be interesting to have as in a book form. But absolutely right about introduction to Woollcott through Harpo, and the idea that of the 2, obviously Harpo is the person whose legacy has endured and has deigned to shine its light on Woollcott. And basically that's why I started the Facebook group in 2018, because I thought, you know what, I think this guy needs a little bolstering. And toward the end of Woollcott's life, if you read his letters, you see the book of letters that B. Kaufman and Joe Hennessy put together. You see toward the end of his life, not that he knew it was the end of his life, but I think he had a sense of mortality, that he wanted to write things that were a little bit more important. So his letters get a little bit more thoughtful and indicative of his inner thoughts, as opposed to just quick, witty, sometimes snarky letters that he would write to people just to be funny, calling them by nicknames and that type of thing. Woollcott, I think, had a sense of his own mortality, and I think he would be happy to realize that Harpo is now making him somewhat immortal, as opposed to the other way around.
It is an ironic turnaround, isn't it? Because he was such a huge figure at the time, wasn't he? I mean, he was one of the dominant cultural figures in America, and I just, if you could just imagine somebody saying to him then, in 100 years' time, this little crazy guy that you kind of treat like a mascot is going to be the person that is keeping your memory alive.
Well, yeah, and in fact, 100 years. I mean, he was. I've posted this in the Facebook group before, but there's the NBC biographies in sound, and they did his in 1956, which was just a little over 10 years after he had passed away. But the way they talk about him, it's almost as if he lived 100 years before, almost as a forgotten great of literature or something. But he'd only been gone a very short time, relatively short time. And his legacy, shall we say, burnt out fairly quickly. As some people have stated, had he lived longer into the time of television, he probably would have been on, What's My Line and I've Got a Secret and things that Kitty Carlisle did, that type of thing, or things that Bennett Cerf did. And he probably could have become a household name again, like he was in the 20s and 30s on radio. But it was not to be.
How old was he when he died, actually? I was just going to say, how old was he? Because he's one of those people that, looks like he's 100 from birth.
Yes. He was 56.
Right.
But he was, I don't know if he was a chain smoker, but he many photos that you see of him, he's smoking a cigarette. I believe that was probably a remnant of World War One. Many doughboys came out of World War One as cigarette smokers. It was the thing to do, and so that I think ultimately, well, besides and his he enjoyed rich foods and desserts. In fact, he lost a lot of weight after his heart attack in 1941, and retreated to his island for a while. Finally, came back, but he was not in good health, and then so he only made it to 56. As a lot of the Algonquin people didn't make it past their 40s and 50s. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of them just didn't take very good care of themselves. Well, I think the smoking did a lot of it, to be honest with you. So don't smoke. That's my takeaway from this podcast. Don't smoke.
Well, you mentioned the island a few times there, and that gets us across the lake to our next big subject, which is a thing I have been wanting to talk to you about for a little over a year now. So to set this up, we should just explain for any listeners who may not know that Alexander Woollcott, in addition to all the fascinating things about him, he owned an island. He just decided it might be a good idea to have a little piece of land that could be his fiefdom. And he did that, didn't he? In 1924, the magical year of 1924, Woollcott and 6 friends went in together, my understanding is, and bought the island of Neshobe, which is in Lake Bomoseen in Vermont, near the town of Castleton. And then I guess over the next several years, Woollcott sort of slowly bought out his friends until he had become the sole owner of this island. And it was a sort of retreat, a getaway for Woollcott and his friends, Harpo very much included, where they would spend time, particularly in the summer. And Neshobe Island is about 230 miles from New York City. So, it's like 4 or 5 hours maybe you drive to get there. So it was pretty accessible, but a world away from, say, the lobby of the Algonquin Hotel, a very primitive and rustic place when Alec first got access to it, which, as noted, was the year he met Harpo. So Harpo was really in on the ground floor of being part of Woollcott's crowd at Woollcott's. And I mean, it sounds like something you say jokingly or metaphorically, but in the most literal way possible, at Woollcott's private island. So one thing we want to say before we launch into this part of the conversation, just to be clear for our listeners, Neshobe Island is not a museum. It's not a public place in any way. It's not a place most of us can visit. It's somebody's private home. And so out of respect for the wishes of the gracious hosts of your visit, there are things that you can't talk about here. And we just want to make it clear this is a privileged visit that you had, and not something anyone can just hike to. And then we also just want to remind our listeners of the place Neshobe Island holds in Marx Brothers history and American literary history. So I gave a few sloppy details from a non-expert, but tell us, Brad, what is Neshobe Island? What is its place in Marx Brothers history and American literary history?
To start out with, it's 7 acres of heaven. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Oh, can I tell you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but since you said that, I just want to interject with Harpo's description from his book. Neshobe was to Alec the most beautiful spot on earth. It was the only place where he ever lived happily alone without an audience.
Yes, because when he, for instance, when he lived with Harold Ross and Jane Grant in New York, he would come home from a play that he was reviewing and sit on their bed and tell them the entire plot of the play. Or he would come home and wake up someone else in the house to play backgammon because he needed to unwind. So this was a place where he could be alone. Of course, he loved having people visit there, but it was his domain. And he, as the 10-Year Lunch and various other documentaries and books have notated, he was in full control even before he bought out the rest of the group, which included, Howard Dietz, of course, Harpo, Alice Duer, Miller,
Beatrice Kaufman was a big part
Beatrice
of that
Kaufman,
crowd. Nisa McMain.
and Ruth Gordon. Just thinking about the people who were on the island and the atmosphere there had to have just been electric and magical, and at the same time casual. And you see that when you're on the island. It's, you think of a cartoon of an island, and it's just this little mound with a palm tree on it. And they have, I don't know how tall the trees are, but they're very tall, and there are eagles nested in the trees, and the eagles fly from tree to tree, and they have little eaglets every year born on the island, and it's a big ritual to see the eaglets moving from the nests and that type of thing. I don't remember reading about that in any accounts about Neshobe, but I'm guessing the eagles. I don't think the Browns brought the eagles with them. I think the eagles probably were there, or in some way, shape, or form when Woollcott was there. But the houses, they have 2 houses and a barn. They have added on to some of the things, but basically it's the same setup as when Woollcott was there.
And these are, you mentioned the Browns. This is Jerry and Devine Brown, who are the current owners and residents.
And Devine was the first one to reach out to me back in about end of 2018, beginning of 2019, through my Facebook group. And at that time, not knowing me, said, you should come to the island sometime. And it took me from 2019 to 2024 to finally get there. And that was very, very happy to oblige visiting there. It's a fun place. There's a hill, there's trees, there's low points, there's a rolling area. There's and you imagine them playing croquet in this area or playing badminton, and there's really not a great expanse to do either of those sports. So you can very much, when you read about Harpo and buckety into the lake and that type of thing, you can see how frustrating it was to the players when Woollcott would shoot somebody into the lake, shoot the croquet ball into the lake, and you couldn't quite hear the balls clicking together, but you could certainly imagine them being on that land and just knocking each other around.
Buckety into the lake is the title of chapter 13 of Harpo Speaks, and it's what Woollcott apparently would say when he hit a croquet ball into the lake. That's how he would inform people.
Besides other things that he was probably saying.
That he also said, yeah. It is interesting how, in Harpo Speaks, certainly you get the sense that croquet and privacy were the 2 primary features of Neshobe Island that drew Woollcott and his friends to spend so much time there, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? We think of these people, the Algonquin Round Table, and even the Marx Brothers, once they get to this part of their career, as creatures of a certain refinement who are comfortable in Broadway theaters and luxury hotels and, the high-toned, shoulder-rubbing parlors of Midtown Manhattan. But actually, they were all in a mania to get to this very primitive, rustic lifestyle on Neshobe Island. When Woollcott bought the island, there was no plumbing or electricity there. It was all just kerosene lamps and that was pretty much the only amenity. His friends, I guess, prevailed upon him. If we're going to hang out here, we want plumbing and electricity.
The classes versus the masses, and the classes won out. You know,
Right.
I think Margalo Gilmore says it in the 10-year lunch. It was a little too rustic for my taste. So some of the people didn't enjoy the, having outdoor plumbing and
You can imagine
that type of thing.
And
Yeah,
Woollcott
yeah.
spent like the last several years of his life there when his health was failing. You had to take a boat to get to a doctor. I mean, it must have been.
Oh yeah,
Genuinely, this was not an easy lifestyle.
No, and Devine has pointed that out in a short documentary they made about them a few years ago, about how many times you had to transfer groceries. You have to transfer groceries just to make a grocery trip and bring the stuff back to the island. You have to, of course, bring it from the store to your car, the car to the dock to the boat to the dock to the and it's like touching these things about 7 or 8 times just to get them in the door of the of one of the buildings there.
It's a big project, yeah. And I lived on Staten Island for 4 years, folks. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that really is something. And I guess partly, obviously, the isolation was important, and many of these people were famous. I mean, Harpo was conspicuously famous in a way that most writers were not. But then, some of the other people who spent time on the island who aren't really part of the Algonquin crowd or the Marx Brothers circle, but, like Noel Coward visited the island and, the Luntz. I mean, very famous people.
Yes. Irene Castle.
Irene
was
Castle.
there frequently. Yeah.
Bernard Shaw, did he?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah. And surprised Harpo naked, right? Or Harpo surprised him naked.
Someone was surprised.
Someone was surprised and someone was naked. And I wonder how much that was. Like, Harpo and others say, well, it was really important to us to be isolated and private. And I think, like, why? This wasn't a particularly bawdy, sexually deviant crowd. There wasn't major drugs or drinking going on. It seems like it was just Harpo's nudity might have been the main reason to not be with the rest of society.
I think not to toot Woollcott's horn too much, but I think people were drawn to Alec Woollcott and what he was doing, and I'm sure initially a bit of curiosity about what's going on the island. Again, I think Margalo Gilmore said to visit the island was something of a royal command. If you were invited to the island, you kind of had made it into that group, if you wanted to be in that group. But I think it was a very witty, very casual, very friendly group to be in, despite what Groucho said for his reasons for not wanting to be part of the Algonquin Round Table, that everybody basically was kind of trying to top each other and that type of thing. I think on the island, things somewhat settled down. Well, and as Harko points out, he was the mischievous elf wherever he went, getting Woollcott upset about not following the rules of games and that type of thing. And I was just rereading about how he cut the tire out so he could make a croquet ball go around the trunk of a tree.
Yes.
And, I mean, it had to have been just nonstop fun and relaxation. And when you think of famous people, you think of, they can do whatever they want, but they really couldn't in a lot of ways. If they were in a place with a lot of fans, they couldn't just walk the streets. They couldn't just relax all the time. And so this was definitely a getaway for them, and definitely a return, I think, as I said, for Woollcott to a more rural lifestyle that he grew up with, both in New Jersey and when his family for a short time moved to Kansas City. He enjoyed getting to know people and having people around him that were interesting and that he could kind of hang out with and ultimately control.
He did seem to have that, and people seem to accept that about him. He was sort of a natural leader, and people sort of seem to accept that Alexander Woollcott made up the rules and everyone else followed them, and that's the deal. He's our leader, and we're okay with that.
I think it was a mixture of affection and not laughing at, but somewhat chuckling at, when you have somebody in your group who's just a little quirky and you kind of put up with that because you really have affection for them. And also he did a lot for a lot of the people who came to the island. I wouldn't say they came there to worship him, but I think they came there to enjoy his company and vice versa. And it was just a good time being had by all.
People really loved him, and Harpo more than anyone. I mean, Susan in her book says when Woollcott died, the only time she saw Harpo more upset than that was when Frenchie died. So that's like a measure of how much he loved him and how important Woollcott was to Harpo.
As we were saying, a lot of people's entry into Woollcott's world was through Harpo. I think a lot of people's affection for Woollcott was bolstered by seeing how much Harpo loved Woollcott. And if there had not been a Harpo, I don't think we would be talking about Woollcott today, to be very honest with you. And I've felt fortunate that I've gotten to know more about Woollcott, his strong beliefs, his strong friendships, his strong help to people in need, making sure that people, if they didn't have money to go to college, he anonymously gave them money and that type of thing. He definitely he got to go to college because of a friend of his mother who set him up with tuition and so forth to Hamilton College. And he was one of those people who definitely paid it forward in his life. And I think that was ultimately his greatest virtue. And I think ultimately became his underlying path in life, to help people and bring people, to be inclusive and bring people into his sphere and to help them as much as he could, because he adored everyone that he brought into his sphere. Like if there was somebody of interest and somebody who was successful in their life or had the potential for success, he wanted to have them around him as much as they wanted to be around him.
It is interesting how when you try to kind of assess Woollcott today and sort of get your arms around him and what was this guy all about, he is one of those writers whose writing isn't really the main thing about him. I mean, you can read his writing now, and some of it is quite good. Some of it is a little overwritten, as we've said. But it's not really so much about his writing, is it? He was a cultural figure larger than the specific output that he left behind on paper. And I also think you mentioned his early life. Samuel Hopkins Adams, in his biography, suggests that one of the reasons Woollcott was drawn to Neshobe Island was because, as you suggest, he had this rural and communal upbringing in a place in New Jersey called the Phalanx. Will you just tell us briefly, for any of our listeners who may not know, what that was all about and how it formed Woollcott? And I think in a way prepared Woollcott for the role that he wound up playing in life with Harpo and others.
It was a farm. Some people have said that Woollcott must have been very rich because he grew up in an 85-room mansion. Well, it wasn't a mansion. It was something that was built around before the Civil War. It began as a commune, as a utopian community, which ultimately failed, and Woollcott's family ended up with the building and the farm. Really couldn't make a go of it at all, and so he had great memories of his father, who for other reasons he really didn't care for, but his father, who was British and apparently was a very good performer at reading Dickens, would read Dickens to the family, and he would visit. He would go back to the house every year once he moved away. Every year at Christmas time, just to see his mother. And it was a rundown, beat up place, but it was home, and that's what he cherished about it. It was his home. It was his beginnings, and all the memories and troubles that may have been associated with it were gold to him. He just held on to those throughout his life, as he often did with other important things, people and places in his life, such as Hamilton College, such as Harco, such as Woollcott's older sister Julie, who basically raised him. He was very sentimental, and I think that's where Woollcott somewhat fell out of favor into the late 40s and 1950s and so on, just because with the end of the war, people were looking for new, better ways to do things, and Woollcott sort of fell by the wayside because a lot of his writing, a lot of his thoughts were about how good things used to be, and that was not what people were looking for in the 1950s. They wanted everything new and improved. They wanted it faster, stronger, that type of thing. So, when I say that some people surmise that he might have been big on TV, maybe not. He may have very well faded into obscurity just as well as anybody else might have. But the Phalanx was his home in his heart, and ultimately Neshobe took that place in his heart.
Well, how very fortunate that you were able to spend time there and schedule this kind of field trip in the middle of your Marx Fest experience. And thank you so much for taking us there with you today and our listeners, and giving us a little bit of a taste of what it was like. It must have just been in the same way we're talking about these New York City locations that are important in Marx Brothers history. It just must have been something to stand on Neshobe Island and fill your lungs with air and just feel that much closer to Harpo and Woollcott.
Felt like I should have been planting a flag. It was kind of like going to the moon. It's like, how did I get here? I don't know how this happened, but I'm here and I'm going to enjoy it. I will say one negative about being on the island. We did stay overnight, Saturday into Sunday, and I slept downstairs on the couch, and I turned the lights off, and it was too dark and too quiet. So I turned the dining room light back on and had it on all night, because it was, as a New Yorker, you are never away from of some sounds and some light coming into your apartment at night. And living in downtown Minneapolis, I had the same thing, and it was just a little too quiet and too dark for me. So I slept with the light out. And then I spoke with Emma a short time afterwards. She said, "Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I felt the same way."
This is a friend of the show, Emma Levitt, designer of many of our postcards. As Brad, too, incidentally designed postcard number 9 for us, which was a Neshobe Island themed postcard. So some of our Patreon subscribers will remember that one. Yeah, I understand that completely. I would have a hard time sleeping, I think, on Neshobe Island if I were there. Well, before we close up this episode, let's see if there are any housekeeping announcements. Anything to say?
Yes, I would like to say...
Yes, the young man in the front.
I would like to say thank you very much indeed to whoever my anonymous benefactor was, who was presumably a listener to this podcast, and who presumably heard me say that I didn't have a copy of the seminal book, Marx Brothers at the Movies, because I now do have a copy of the seminal book, The Marx Brothers at the Movies. So if you're listening, It's very, very much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Matthew will be accepting presents for the rest of the year if anybody would like to send him something. And I would like to mention, as always, that we are grateful to our Patreon subscribers who make this podcast and its continued existence possible. If you are not a Patreon subscriber, please consider joining us. Many thrilling rewards can be yours, including our monthly bonus segments, our monthly postcards, and even more exceptional gifts. Join us at patreon.com/Marx Brothers Council Podcast, or go to marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com. And now, what better way to end this episode than with a game of croquet? Or rather, with the song Croquet from the children's musical Wonderland, written by Kate Belcher, based on Lewis Carroll.
Marx Brothers Council podcast is produced by Bob Gassell. Matthew Conium's books, including the annotated Marx Brothers, the annotated Abbott and Costello, and That's Me Groucho, are published by McFarland. Noah Diamond's book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of Alsatias, is published by Beer Manor Media. To leave a comment and for more info about this and all episodes, visit us at marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com. For the latest Marx Brothers and podcast news, look for us on Blue Sky and Twitter. And join the fun with the largest and most vibrant Marx community online, a club that will have someone like you as a member. The Marx Brothers Council Facebook group. That's it for now. Swordfish!
That's it, you get it.